There is no funny bit. There's no joke. I just absolutely despised working on this part. Let's just get on with the video. Now I have to go down two different paths. One being that physical design route, and the second being that virtual design route, i.e. the coding, the software, all that kind of thing. And I did these both simultaneously, so instead of just going back and forth in an episode, I decided to give each one an episode of its own. So first up is virtual design to break up the monotony of physical design. So I got started learning some code.
As I'm sure you can tell by now, this was probably the hardest part of the design process for me because I hadn't done anything similar to programming or anything of the like since GCSE, in fact, where I did my computer science GCSE, and I was also very much into programming as a whole. That being said, we shall see how good I am. First, I needed to figure out exactly what I was going to do. I knew what I wanted, as you can see by these list of goals that I need to achieve up now. However, I had no idea how to get that. So, first thing I did was build a quick roadmap. As you can see here, apologies for the poor video quality. And this basically lists out every goal I would need to achieve individually before I could reach the perfect example of what this program could be. Now, of course, I faced a huge amount of issues along the way, with the hardest part being is I had no idea where to start. I began searching and experimenting, initially reteaching myself a little bit of C++ and Python, two of my preferred languages, before realizing that those weren't going to cut it for what I wanted. And eventually, I came across a Node module that would allow me to access EXIF data, store the EXIF data, and erase the EXIF data, if so please. And this optional variety led me to decide to use this software. Unfortunately for me, I still, at this point I had no idea what a Node module was, so I spent a good time trying to figure that out. But once I did, I was able to get the precise programming I needed. Just for clarification's sake, a Node.js is a terminal or an environment where you type JavaScript in, which is the programming language, and a Node module is just think of it like a folder full of new functions that aren't native to the Node.js software. Now with this Node module PyExif.js and two other Node modules, I was able to begin my testing with the programming. To get this, I realized that I would not be able to finish my product to its maximum degree, so I planned to make it in a more proof of concept kind of way, where all I needed to do was actually to be able to look at the photograph stored on a computer and take its EXIF data and show its time taken. Once I've shown its time taken, I need to be able to check the current time, and then I need to be able to open that image. That's all I need for a proof of concept, and thus I had 3 tests I needed to figure out individually. The EXIF test, the opening test, and the current time test. Well, let's start with the EXIF test. Now the EXIF test was probably one of the hardest ones, as I started with it for some reason, and I had no idea how to write JavaScript, and this was a complicated module, the likes of which I was not used to. Regardless, eventually I managed to get an accurate program that would allow me to sort through a given image directory, i.e. I'd tell it where the image was in my storage, like directly in the programming. I'd be able to look at that, and from that I'd be able to take the time that it was, and from that I would effectively be able to take the time it was taken, store it as a variable, and then print it back out at you. There's a lot more finer details, but I go more into that in the website. That's all you need to know for now. So with that, I considered the EXIF test a check. The next test I needed was the opening test, where I would need to figure out how to open an image from a given directory. I also wanted to use this test to create an array that could automatically update what's in my directory of images, so I wouldn't have to manually input every time I found a new image. As I coded, I managed to get it just so that it does precisely that, using the Node module open and some for loops for my array. With that, I could test it. I tested it so that every time I added a new image, the array would update, and every time I put in the function, it would open all the images in that array. If I took images out, then it would only open those images, not all 4 of them. This was perfect for what I needed, and another check. Finally, I only had the current time test left, and surprisingly, this is quite difficult. But even so, all I really needed to do was set up a dummy variable that I would use as a time check, and set up a function that could allow me to use various variables and the like to be able to get the current time, store it in a string format, and then check it against the dummy variable, with it outputting a true response if the two are equal. I found that the two were equal at some point, so effectively I'd gotten it so that it would check the current time against a given variable, and when it's done that, it will output the value I want, and this was part of what I needed. Now, with all my 3 tests complete, I had to combine them all to give my first code, and that being my first test.js. Now, when coding the first test.js, I found that I wanted to test it with a small sample size so as not to get into too much hazy waters. I combined the 3 codes and put them together in with a variety of features in between to make it work. However, I realized that testing it was incredibly difficult, as whenever I would need an image that had the exact time, and if I didn't have, and I couldn't find that image in anywhere because there was no way to sort your photo library by hour and minute, hence why I was creating the whole thing to begin with. And this led to a great reduction in the speed at which it took me to code this program, which was upsetting, but eventually I managed to get it right. I managed to get it so that at a certain time, it would check that current time. It would check it against an array of all the images in the folder, of which I only used 4 at this time. It would check if any of those images had the same time, and if it did, it would open that image in the default photo viewing app with the desktop or whatever. And thankfully for me, that's a success. It works. Isn't that perfect? Unfortunately for me, this is not where my story ends. No. I had quite a bit more testing to do. With one of the first piece testing is to move the code to the Raspberry Pi. And surprisingly, this part wasn't all too difficult. The hardest part was downloading Node.js. Once I'd done that, I could just rewrite the code, rewrite the script, and then upload a few images. And honestly, it worked perfectly well. And now came a more serious test. First, before the serious test, I did some quick heat tests, and I found that the Raspberry Pi would get quite hot, but not hot enough to damage any of the metal filaments or wires as I tested it, especially overnight. So heat shouldn't be a massive problem. The big test was testing with the largest sample size, and this was where it got serious. I had a variety of issues that held me back when testing with a large sample size that I go into more detail on the website, and you can see quickly here. However, eventually I managed to get past it after several attempts of failure, as you can see here. Oh, it's getting quite hot now. I can still move around it's been killed. Okay.
I remember why I stopped programming now. I remember.
Regardless, I wouldn't give up. I would keep trying. I'd hit the books again. I'd rewrite the code. I'd change a few things. I'd add a few more things. And after 10 minutes of waiting before I could get an image, I'd try it again, and I've started it running again. Nothing's happening. Huh. Wonder. Oh, it's been killed. Oh, God. I would fail is what that was. But eventually I put together a folder of images handpicked from me, and that of course isn't an example of the iPhotos library, but I did not know where the images were, so it still keeps the element of randomness. The only reason I needed to handpick them is so that I knew that they would have the right size and right file type, which is an issue, as I've seen above. Once I'd done this, once I had my folder of 134 images, I was able to rewrite my code.
And then finally, a miracle which happened. You'll never guess. It didn't work.
Would you look at that? It's been done.
No, but seriously, this time, I'm so glad it worked. I'm sick and tired of doing programming. And I know it's just a proof of concept, but it's something, you know?
Now that I knew it was working, I had a few more tests to do. I had a bunch of consecutive images I'd taken last night, so you can see my quick time-lapse here. And it comes with several few issues, for example, it not being full screen and that sort of thing. But I realized that I could get into these issues later. So I left my program running overnight and found that at 7:50 the next day, it had killed itself, even though there were only 5 images it needed to open. Oh, by the way, the program killing itself just means it stopped. That's actual terminology, I swear. Now, I needed to look at what the code was actually good for, because I had just made it, obviously. Now, as you can see above, I've got two good things for the code, and that's not many, but it's still something. The code works as a proof of concept. It just does. It works. And not only that, but the program can run without constant input from the command line, so it can effectively run itself. However, if you look at the things the code fails to achieve, not only in terms of the original plan, but also in terms of just this code, it gets a bit longer, with issues ranging from why the photo viewing software doesn't allow you to open full screen, so you need to manually full screen, otherwise it looks like garbage. No current consistent proven way of closing the open photo, so eventually it will have to kill itself. The program seeming to shut down after only 220 pictures or 8 hours of work, even though there are only 5 pictures being opened. Some stack issues, no option to kill the program manually. All images must be JPEGs and above 1 megabyte. Honestly, this goes on. And it's not, and worst of all, in my opinion, it's not even like design. It only goes 60 seconds, like the timer only goes 60 seconds after the program is start. It's not even synced up to real time. So you could start at 50 seconds into 951 and have to wait 50 seconds into 952 to get your next image, which really does break the immersion. I think is a big deal breaker.
With all that being said and done, I've now come to the natural conclusion of my proof of concept virtual design episode. Now, it's not as much as it could be, but it definitely is exactly what I need it to be. It acts as its proof of concept. It acts as something I could show to people and they'd be like, oh yeah, I get it. Anyway, with that being said, I am going to now do the physical design because I don't want to be here anymore.